This album offers every salesman 4 important keys to success in selling. While each of the keys may seem fundamental and obvious to anyone, thousands of salesmen fail on one count or another to put all 4 into practice. And we believe you'll soon agree that no one can afford to ignore this entertaining and informative exposition of the 4 keys by Dr. Arthur Secord. Dr. Secord is Director of Community Service and Professor of Speech at Brooklyn College, Brooklyn, New York. He received his A.B. degree from Western Michigan University and his M.A. and Ph.D. from the University of Michigan. He has taught speech and human relations, subjects all important to professional salesmen, at the Universities of Michigan, Western Michigan, Missouri, Manitoba, and Western Ontario. And he's now in his 18th year at Brooklyn College. He's author of How to Tell What You Know, a handbook for salesmen, top management, personnel directors, or anyone who must communicate. He's listed in Who's Who in the East, Who Knows and What, Directory of American Scholars, and Who's Who in American Education. He has spoken to sales executives and other groups in each of the 48 continental United States and in every province of Canada. Twice he has flown to Germany to deliver the keynote address at conferences for U.S. Army Public Information Officers. The talk you're about to hear was taped before a sales group previously addressed by another speaker whose albums are available through the Businessmen's Record Club, Mr. Jack Lacey. And now, here is Dr. Arthur Secord.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad I heard Jack's talk because, you know what? He proved to us that if you want to stay a salesman, don't use hot-button salesmanship because they'll make you vice president. All you'll end up with is a key to the private toilet. I don't know how many of you have any teenagers around the house. We have one, but she's not around the house now. She's a freshman at the University of Michigan. But Jan and I, for years, have had a set program. When things got too calm around the house, we'd go into a kind of a vaudeville act to stir her mother up. And late last summer, Jan had a little guest, a gal friend, came down from New England to visit her. They had both been writing counselors in a camp near Pittsburgh, or near Beckett, Massachusetts, Chimney Corners Camp. Well, this little girl we fell in love with her, and about the 4th day she was there at dinner, Jan decided things had been calm long enough, so you see, if I start it, she's the straight man. If she starts it, I become the straight man. So she starts, said, Dad, she said, you know what they call that drink where they mix vodka and orange juice? And, of course, I'm the straight man. I said, yes, Jan. They call that a screwdriver. She said, that's right, Dad. I said, you know what they call that drink where they mix vodka and prune juice? And I said, no, Jan. What do they call that drink where they mix vodka and prune juice? Well, she said, they call that a can opener. Well, as would happen, of course, in any well-ordered home, Mrs. Secord started giving us a going-over for being so uncouth in front of our little guest from New England. Meantime, the little guest from New England is laughing like crazy, and she said, I think that's very funny. She said, I never heard that before. She said, in Pittsfield, we always called that a pile driver. You and I know that no human being has ever done anything except as the result of motivation. If you or I did anything, whether it was to make a purchase or to make a sale, whether the act was legal or illegal, moral or immoral, if we did it, we were motivated. It was the result of motivation. We don't always know where the motivation comes from. Remember your mother saying to you many times, or maybe the judge, why did you do it? And many of us stood in front of the judge or in front of mother and said, quite honestly, I don't know why I did it. We were telling the truth. But back there someplace, there was a motivation. Motivation isn't always obvious. I live at the present time, although I was born and raised in Michigan, I live at the present time in Great Neck in Nassau County on the north shore of Long Island. A fellow brought a dog into a veterinary shop the other day, and he said to the vet, why don't you cut this dog's tail off right flush with his body? He said, don't leave a thing. So the veterinary looked at the dog and said, "That's a registered animal, isn't it?" "Yeah," he said, "he's registered in the American Kennel Club, but I didn't bring him in to be admired. I want his tail cut off. Right flush with his body," he said, "don't leave a thing." So the veterinary said, "In my professional judgment, that would be mutilation." The man said, "All right, if you won't cut it off, I'll take it to another veterinary and have it cut off." The fellow said, "I'll cut it off if you have a good reason." Well, the fellow said, "My mother-in-law is coming to visit us in about a month." And the vet said, Well, he said, "That's the reason." And the vet said, "I don't get it." Well, he said, "When my mother-in-law gets here, I don't want anything around the house that'll let the old lady think she's welcome." Now, I say again, motivation isn't always obvious, but it's always there. There's another thing we know about motivation, and that is that when a human being is properly motivated, now we're talking about the hot button technique. When you hit the hot button, when the person is properly motivated, he can do things of which he would be even physically incapable of doing without the motivation. We've got a neighbor up there on the North Shore whose path homeward each evening leads through a cemetery. And one night, unbeknownst to him, they dug a grave right across the path and hadn't put up either a barrier or a light. Bang, he ended up in the bottom. And it was a deep one, and he couldn't get out. He jumped, hollered, cussed, scratched. Finally, in a semi-state of exhaustion, he said to himself, "Now, wait a minute. You're not the only stupid person in the community. Why don't you take it easy? Eventually, somebody else bound to fall in here. Maybe the two of you together can get out." So he went back in the corner, sat down, fell asleep. Some hours later, wham, company. Well, he did what I think you or I would do. He just sat there kind of enjoying hearing this new arrival, going through the same psychological experiences he'd gone through when he first fell in, jump, holler, cuss, scratch. He recognized his voice. This was a neighbor of his. So he waited a little while, and then he said rather quietly, "You can't jump out of here, Charlie," but Charlie did. For many years, a man by the name of Shirley Smith was vice president and secretary of the University of Michigan, where I had the honor of teaching for about 8 years. And Shirley Smith said many times that there are 3 parts to every job. Number 1, filling the things that are empty. Number 2, emptying the things that are full. And number 3, scratching where it itches. Now, it doesn't make a great deal of difference this afternoon which one of the 3 parts of the job is yours, or which one of the 3 parts of the job is mine, and you people are engaged fundamentally in 2 and 3. I believe we're all interested in this topic that I'm going to discuss informally for a little while, namely personality and the sales game. And as Jack told you, it said right on my program, I am to start speaking at 1:05 and to quit at 1:35. So you know when I'm going to quit. And that's going to be a long time from now. I would like to talk about personality. First of all, let's define it. Because when you're a debate coach, as I was at Michigan for 8 years, you tell them, define your terms. And I'm going to define personality as evaluated individualism. Evaluated individualism. It makes my personality depend not on what I am, or what I may even believe myself to be, but on what somebody else thinks I am. For example, you can approach this either positively or negatively. You and I meet a chap, we talk to him for 20 minutes, he leaves the room, I turn to you and say, he had an obnoxious personality, didn't he? And you say, I thought he had a charming personality. And the peculiar thing, and in many ways the terrible truth, is that you and I are both right. Because your personality at any given moment or in any given sales contact, or mine, depends on the sum total of the impact we've had on some other human being. Now, if this is the case, and I'm going to proceed on the assumption that it is, we can approach it positively or negatively. I can talk about the positive characteristics that go to make up an effective personality. Or I can talk about the negative characteristics that prevent the normal functioning of an effective personality. For example, some years ago, a chap in New York, whose name escapes me at the moment, wrote a book called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Shortly after that, the son of a banker in Madison, Wisconsin, by the name of Irving Tressler, wrote a book called How to Lose Friends and Alienate People. Now, Tressler simply took Dale Carnegie's book, I remember now, and he wrote the negative side. Where Dale had a chapter on dining out for the first time, you should read Tressler's chapter on dining out for the last time. Where Dale had a chapter, on how to get along with bores, Tressler has one on how to bore bores. Just save time this afternoon. I'm going to take the Carnegie approach and discuss 4 characteristics, 4 bits of knowledge that I hope you will agree with me, you people as salesmen would have to develop and maintain if you would do an effective job so far as personality in the sales game is concerned. And the first of these is that if you come to sell me, or if I come to your office or your place of business to buy something, unless you know more about my needs than I do, you're not ready to sell me. I'm going to repeat that. When you come to sell me, if you don't know more about my needs than I do, you're not ready to sell me. Let me give you an example. I have a brother-in-law. In fact, I'm going to see him tonight. His daughter and her husband live out here in Framingham. He's now a druggist up in Littleton, New Hampshire. He made his money in Sturgis, Michigan in a drugstore. This was an ethical pharmacy. You know, chicken salad sandwiches, outboard motors. This is a real drugstore. And for years, when I taught at the University of Michigan, this George Jackman drugstore there in Sturgis had the best supply of hunting and fishing equipment in southern Michigan. And I always planned to be in Sturgis the weekend before the fishing season opened because I like to sell fishing tackle. I can sell fishing tackle. One of the reasons is that I am a fisherman. I know what to do with it. I know what it's for. I don't need to tell you. If you don't know your product, don't try to sell it. One Saturday night, the season was opening Sunday morning. I was busy in the store with something. My brother-in-law was tied up. Old Big Business walked in the store. I don't know who he was, but I know his clothing looked expensive. I know his cigar smelled good secondhand. And he walked up to a clerk who didn't know which end of a fish bit, and he said to the clerk, "I should like to purchase a fishing outfit." I couldn't get to him. My brother-in-law couldn't get to him. That clerk sold him a fishing outfit. This was in the early 30s. He sold him a tackle box, a fish pole, a line, a reel, and some assorted baits, and the total sale on the cash register, $5.67. When we got the store closed that night, George and I were talking about it, and I said, "You know, Yetch, I think if I'd have got my hands on that baby, I could have taken him for $200. George says, "I think I could have taken him for $350. I did not say that you should stick every customer for every penny you can get out of him, but let's follow that man out of that store that night. I'm just guessing now. Let's say he had a cottage out at Klinger Lake. And some weeks later, a friend dropped in from Los Angeles or Miami or Boston or Montreal or Toronto, and he got in a rowboat and he went out on Klinger Lake and he got this fishing tackle out. And his friend says to him, "Where did you get that junk?" And he said, "Isn't this good fishing tackle?" And his friend will tell him, and he'll never go in that drugstore again. Let my brother-in-law take him for $350. Let the same friend drop in. Let him get in the same rowboat, go out on the same lake, and he gets it out, and his friend said, "Beautiful tackle you have there." He said, "Is this good fishing tackle?" He said, "I have never seen finer." He said, "I got that right uptown here in Jackman's drugstore. But if I walk into that store and all I can afford for my fishing outfit is $5.67, I should be able to buy it and walk out with my self-respect intact." I taught 12 summers at the University of Western Ontario in London, Ontario. We would just rent a house from some professor who wasn't there that summer. One summer we had a house that had a lawn that was a psychological challenge. It was too small for a lawnmower and too big for shears. Well, I was downtown one day on Dundas Street and went by a hardware store, and here was a window, was a pile of garden hose nozzles, a sign over there, 39 cents. I said, "I'll buy one, spritzer." They didn't have one out there. I said, "I'll buy it and just leave it." So I went in and I said to the clerk, "I would like to purchase an inexpensive garden hose nozzle." "Yes, sir," said he. $7.50. Hot and cold running water, reverse, everything else. I said, "You misunderstood me. I want an inexpensive one." "Oh, I'm sorry," said he. $4.90. 3 nozzles later, we're down to $1.50. I'm not going to ask for a cheap one. I didn't want a cheap one. I want an inexpensive one. And finally I said to him, "You got some in the window. I think they're 39 cents. And he says, "Oh, those? Oh, if that's what you want." I walked out of that store. I walked down the street to the next hardware store, and I believe bought the identical nozzle for 65 cents and paid it gladly, because I bought it in a place where I could walk out and keep my self-respect. I don't care whether you're selling a service or a product. You don't have all the same range. We don't need the same range many times. And unless you know what we need when we come in, you're not ready to sell us. Let me give you another example. I was at the University of Missouri when I took a job at Brooklyn College. I took a 1-semester leave. I didn't know whether I could stay in the New York City area or not. I'd never lived in a large city. So I left my family in Columbia. I went to Brooklyn College. I liked it, and I started looking for a house. I looked all over North Jersey and Staten Island and Westchester and finally got out on Long Island. And every place I would go, the real estate people would say, "What are you looking for?" And I would always say something in the $7,000 to $10,000 class. And believe it or not, those real estate people were sufficiently stupid that for months they showed me $7,000 to $10,000 houses because I told them that's what I wanted. And one afternoon, a woman had been showing me all over town to some other things in Manhasset and Great Neck, Roslyn. Came back, and the man who owned the agency said, "Secord, have you got a few minutes to waste?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "Get in the car." He didn't say where we were going. He said, "Get in the car." I did. He started out. He said, "I'd like to show you a house." He said, "It's outside your range, but I think it's a beautiful home. I'd like to have you see it." We've been living in it for 18 years. Why? Because he knew more about my needs than I did. He was a salesman. Do you know what I was looking for? I was looking for a house that 5 years before would have sold for from $7,000 to $10,000 in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And it's easy for a man to say, "Well, he's a college professor, he's got a PhD degree, my God, he knows what he wants." You might think so. But I didn't. And this man was enough of a salesman. He knew more about my needs than I did. And I repeat, if you don't know more about my needs than I do when I come to your place or you come to me, you're not ready to sell me. That's number one. Number two, and it's been touched on several times in this conference, if you want me to keep coming back to you or to your organization, see to it that I get a special service. See to it that somehow or other I have the impression that with you, I get a special service. I'm not talking about kickbacks. I'm not talking about under-the-counter payments. I'm talking about a special service. You know, I felt good in a bank when somebody, a teller, was just counting out money, came to a dirty bill and put it to one side. I always figure somebody I don't like is going to get that. If I were a bank teller, I think every few days I'd hide a few dirty bills in the pile, just so I could sort them out when I'm counting out money for nice people like you.
For more from Dr. Secord about knowing customer needs and the other 3 keys of successful selling, please turn this record to side 2.
A special service. Let me give you an example. In Great Neck, my wife said to me one day, "I want you to go downtown." She said, "Get a loaf of bread and get it at Henke's." I said, "Yes, dear." Well, I am so cheap. Now, I'll bet there's some fellows in the crowd here. I'll use up 20 cents worth of gasoline looking for a meter that's got a half a penny's worth of time left on it. So when I find my meter, Henke's is clear across town. Well, here's another store, and they sell bread. I go in, I get a loaf of bread. And I get home, said, "Did you get the bread, dear?" I said, "Yes, I did." Well, she said, "Good for you." Pretty quick, a scream from the kitchen. "You didn't get it at Henke's." I said, "It's a loaf of bread." She said, "I told you to get it at Henke's." We're downtown one day, and she said, "Park here, dear. I want to go into Henke's and get a pie." She disappeared. I decided I'd go in and see what goes on. That place was packed. It always is where you get a special service. Pretty quick, one of the sales girls said, "Good afternoon, Mr. Secord." I said, "Oh, bunk. They just remember names." My wife fell for that one. She hadn't started. My wife said, "I'd like a cherry pie." Yes. Here were more cherry pies than I can see any excuse for any bakery having on any one day. Did she grab a cherry pie and wrap it up? Not for my wife. What? Probably the smallest pie in the case. That doesn't matter. But it was selected for Mrs. Arthur Secord. And my wife says, "Get it at Henke's." I'm surrounded up there in Great Neck by chain store buyers, these variety store buyers and officials. I used to feel sorry for those guys till I see what happens around Christmas time. One fellow puts a sign on his doorbell, "Leave all packages in the garage," and then he cleans it out 4 times a day. I got another neighbor that says to these fellows that are dishing out the graft, you know, he said, "Never mind those $100 pen and pencil sets. Send me whiskey and be sure it's Scotch." A year ago last Christmas, he got 42 cases of Scotch. We were there at a cocktail party one afternoon. I poured some Scotch into a thing, reached for the soda. He said, "Take it easy. That cost me money." Fellow who lives right next door to me, he's retired now. His name is Tom Walsh. In fact, he was born in Fitchburg. Tom Walsh, for years, bought all the rag department for H.L. Green. And as I'd move around the country, I'd see an H.L. Green store. I'd usually want to kill some time. I'd go in and ask for the manager and tell him my next-door neighbor was Tom Walsh. I just thought I'd drop in and say hello. And I was in Columbus, Ohio one day. I'm going on High Street, and there's a big sign, H.L. Green. So I went in and said to the manager. He said, the little fellow over there. So I went and introduced myself. Well, he said, how is Tom? I haven't seen him for years. And I said, well, Tom's fine. He's getting ready to retire next year. He said, I didn't know he was that old. Well, I said, how you doing in the rag department? He said, not so good. I said, why not? Doesn't Tom get you good stuff? He said, he gets this beautiful stuff. I said, well, why don't you sell it? He said, let me show you. We went out on High Street, and he showed me a window, which for a store of this kind, I would say was a beautifully windowed piece of merchandise. Did you see that? Yep. See the price? Yep. Said, right down the street here, Lazarus will outsell us 20 yards to 1 on that same piece of goods. They don't window it, they don't advertise it, and they're getting 10 cents a yard more than this price we've got right here in the window. So then I started some research. You know, this is wonderful, this research. And every time I got in a home in Columbus, I'd say, where's the best place in town to trade? They say, oh, Lazarus. And I'd say, why? Well, he said, you get something at Lazarus. I don't care how long you've had it. I don't care why you don't like it. If you don't like it, you take it back, you get your money back. I asked every one of them the same question, and I got the same answer from every one, and here was the question. What's the last thing you ever took back? And the answer was never took anything back. But there is a feeling in the air that if you buy it at Lazarus and you get dissatisfied, you go back, you get your money back. A special service. And I'm telling you that when you create the impression in me that when I deal with you, I get a special service, I stop asking price. And it's the only way I know of to whip cheap competition. There isn't a service or a product that can't be made cheaper. I don't mean less expensively. I mean cheaper and sold for less. And I'm going to tell you very frankly, I talk to purchasing agents quite a bit. I was up in Buffalo talking to the Purchasing Agents Association 2 weeks ago, and I've told them that they have loused up more legitimate suppliers than any other group in the United States. And they do it on 2 words, or equal. In New York City, you send in your order, and then they always put on the bottom, or equal. And what you get under or equal sometimes reminds me of my Irish uncle. He used to say the fellow that named near beer was a damn poor judge of distance. We had in our office some filing cases. They were beautiful. They worked. They had a thumb cat. They had a lock on them. They had roller bearings under them. They worked beautifully. I put in an order for 8 more, and I gave the manufacturer's name and the model number. This is what I wanted. And the cases arrived. And I went to open a drawer, and rip! There was no latch. There was no thumb catch. I called the purchasing agent in. This fellow, we had an interesting thing. When he set up his office, he put up a sign there, college buyer. Oh, we took care of that. We fixed it up so every hour someone would call him and say, is this the college buyer? And he'd say, yes. He'd say, well, I got a small college for sale. So that sign came down. Now he's a purchasing agent. I called him in and I said, why did you get this instead of the one? He said, that's equal. I said, open that drawer. And he tried it. I said, open this one. He says, they aren't the same, are they? I said, they're not. And if when you and I put in an order, if purchasing agents will let the supplier of that junk take the place of a man who is building an honest product and a quality product, and they do that enough, the man with the quality product is going to go out of business. And so many times there's so little that those of us who are doing the buying, who are putting in the specs, can do about it. Do we get a special service? Do we get a special service? If we do, we come back to you. Number 3. I've been to many sales meetings. I went to one sales rally where they had 2 speakers on one subject. I figured, brother, this really needs driving home. And that subject was how to close. How to close. And I listened to both the speeches. My turn came along. I said, there was one thing that was never mentioned. And that was the little word. I think sometimes in sales courses, and I wouldn't wonder if Jack could go right along with me on it, it is more important perhaps to tell a salesman when to close than it is how. Because so many sales are lost because the close was not put, it was either too soon or too late. Let me give you an example. I worked my way through college selling Hoover sweepers out of the Boyce Hardware Company in Port Huron, Michigan. And after a couple of summers, you know how it is in your game, after a while you sell a thing long enough, you get sold on it yourself. And after I'd sold these things for a while, I got to thinking they were a wonderful machine. And I decided if I ever got married and I ever had enough money, I was going to buy my wife a Hoover. Now, I was selling them back in 1922, 23, and 24. I got married in 31, and about 3 years later, I had enough money to buy a Hoover. I suppose I had looked forward for months to the look on this salesman's face. Salesman, put it in quotes. When I went up and said, I want to buy one of those, nobody ever did that to me in the Boys Hardware Company when I was on the demonstration table. So one afternoon, I walked into Herpelsheimer's department store in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and here was the demonstration table with the guard on duty. And I walked up to him and said, I want to buy one of those in the middle size. And he looked at me and said, have you ever seen this machine demonstrated? And I nearly popped a vest button. I said, I've sold them. And he said, when was that? I said, 1923. He said, that wasn't this machine. And he gets out his K-Pock and his talcum powder and his sand and his needles and thread, and he starts a demonstration. I bought a Hoover in Jones Department Store in Kalamazoo, Michigan the next week. I have had people say that shows you have a filthy, nasty disposition, and that statement is right. And that's also the kind of people you're selling. I said this band didn't deserve the commission, and you know what he should have done? He should have got the Hoover, and then he should have got the money and put it in a safe place. And then he should have said, have you got a few minutes for me to show you some of the recent developments in this machine? And if I had said no, he should have said, wear it in good health. But somebody had told him that you demonstrate, and at the end of the demonstration, you close. And I say again, sometimes Shakespeare knew about this. He put in the mouths of one of his characters this statement, there is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. That tide either is the time when you press the button or when you clinch the sale. And Shakespeare had it nailed right down. That could be a slogan in any sales organization in the world. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. So do you know when to close? And the fourth of these I would like to discuss briefly this afternoon is that I believe in the conduct of your own work. I don't care at what level or in what line. You should so conduct your own life, you should so conduct your profession, that memory never has as much to offer you as hope. That memory never has as much to offer you as hope. What do I mean by that? I was speaking in Toronto one night, and I had a little time in the afternoon, and I walked into the General Library in Toronto, and I saw a sign over a door that said Kipling Room. He's always been one of my favorites. I walked in, and there was an inscription on the wall, which, as my daughter Jan would say, left me all shook up. And I hope it disturbs you as deeply as it disturbed me. Jack Lacey was talking about the same thing this afternoon. Listen to what I read on that wall. In the Kipling Room of the General Library in Toronto. What you do when you don't have to determines what you will be when you can no longer help it. Think that one over. What you do when you don't have to determines what you will be when you can no longer help it. This is where character is built, good and bad. This is where habits are set, good and bad. The salesman who sleeps late in the morning, or who goes into a movie in the afternoon, or who doesn't go to a conference such as this because he's got to make a living. What you do when you don't have to, said they, determines what you will be when you can no longer help it. And a few weeks later, I found myself in the Americana Hotel in Miami Beach to speak to the National Convention of the National Business Publications Association. I dare say that some of those people are in this room. Some of them will probably be down there at the Diplomat in Hollywood in a couple of weeks for the Printing Institute of America, where I'm going to speak. They talked for 3 days at this convention on fundamentally one subject, and here it was: we got to change because the times are changing, and if we don't change, we're going to be behind the times. 3 days of that. We have to change. Why? Because the times are changing, and if we don't change, we're going to be behind the times. You know, that attitude toward leadership is exemplified by a statement during the French Revolution. The mob was charging down one of the great avenues of Paris, and behind them came a lone figure, one of the best-known citizens of that great city. And someone said to him, you see, why do you follow the mob? And he said, I have to, I'm their leader. There's too much of that kind of leadership going on in the world today. Why did the times change? The times changed because somebody changed them. The times changed because somebody had some guts. The times changed because somebody led instead of followed, because somebody initiated instead of imitated. If you will run your business for 25 years by sending the spies out to see what the competition is doing and then come as close to that as you can, 25 years from today, You'll be doing a business about the way the better competition did between 15 and 20 years ago. And there's nothing you can do about that, and it is easy to tell how you're coming. Which offers you the most, memory or hope? And when the dream of the quotas we made last year, last month, last week, when that brings a bigger glow to our heart than what we're going to do next year, next month, next week, you are in what I call the rut of repetitive mediocrity. And it isn't a very good rut in which to get caught. I don't believe in slogans, but if I were forced this afternoon to choose a slogan by which our children would have to live, the slogan I would select would be this: beaten paths are for beaten men. Beaten paths are for beaten men. The man who always follows the beaten path is the man who no longer has what it takes to beat a new trail through the jungle. The man who no longer has what it takes to find a better way, a new way. This world in which we are living today was built by men who did not follow beaten paths. And I don't care whether you're talking about Muhammad or Confucius or Moses or Jesus, or whether you're talking about Galileo or Copernicus, or whether you're talking about Thomas A. Edison or Albert Einstein or Jack Lacey. It's people who have changed things, people who have originated something, people who have maybe taken the old wine and presented it in a new bottle. Those are the people who have built this country into what it is at the present time. A long time ago, Herodotus said, all men's gains are the fruit of venturing. All men's gains are the fruit of venturing. A turtle makes progress only when its neck is out. Human beings, organizations, businesses, communities are the same way. I don't know when Herodotus said that. I know when he died. He died 450 years before Jesus was born. And he said all men's gains are the fruit of venturing, and it is as true today as when Herodotus first said it, and it will be true 1,000 years from now. You and I, in our attempt to do a better job of selling from time to time, are constantly bringing about changes in our personality. If you ever get satisfied with yourself as you are, you might as well quit. And I'm going to conclude with two quotations. One, a quotation that has given me a lot of comfort, and the second one, a quotation that will solve any sales problem with which you will be faced during the next 85 years. And the first one is the one that has brought me the comfort when you get the end of a year, I care not whether it is a fiscal year or a calendar year, and you look back on your disappointments and your minor accomplishments and your major accomplishments, and then you look ahead to the dream of tomorrow, what we're going to do next month, next year, in the years ahead. Robert Louis Stevenson said, to travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive. To travel hopefully is a better thing than to arrive. And the true reward is to labor. And the quotation with which I wish to sign off this whole proposition, this whole conference, comes from Mahatma Gandhi. I have been criticized for using this. I have been told that it is sacrilegious. If I believed that, of course, I would not use it. I've never been told that by a priest, a minister, or a rabbi. Rabbis, ministers, and priests tell me that this quotation of Gandhi's is sound theology. But I'm telling you now that if you will memorize this quotation and use it, memorize it and use it, it will solve any sales problem with which you will ever be faced. Listen to the statement of that great man. God himself dares not appear to a hungry man except in the form of bread. There, my friends, is a hot button. God himself dares not appear to a hungry man except in the form of bread. If a man is hungry, he's not interested in streets that are paved with gold or in pearly gates unless he can get something to eat with the gold or the pearl. What does that mean to you and me? Just this. If I want you to do something for me, I should present that in terms of your needs, your hopes, your wants, your dreams, your aspirations. I should never ask you to buy an insurance policy because if I make one more sale, I'll be in the $1 million round table. I should never ask you to buy a service or a product because if I make this sale, I win the trip to Bermuda. I should ask you to buy because it's good for you. And if you want me to buy something for you or do something for you, you had better present that in terms of my needs, my hopes, my wants, my dreams, my aspirations. What are you selling? Gluts? What's in the warehouse? Or are you selling what people need and what people want? And if you will find the answer to that, you will have Jack Lacey's hot button. Your sales will improve, the companies and the organizations of which you are so important a part, the community in which you live, as well as each of you individually, will prosper.